Hello and welcome to Willoughby DIY. My name's Faith and today we're making corrugated trees. We're turning cardboard boxes into Christmas decorations, and it's all part of my 12 Days of Christmas DIY series. Let's get started. You will need 4 of these tinsel trees from the Dollar Tree. We're going to remove the tinsel from them so it doesn't matter what color they are. Just pull it off the top of the tree form and unravel it. Do that with the other 3 and grab you a ton of cardboard. All the cardboard I used came from one box. It was from my computer. I'm just going to cut it down into smaller sections because it makes it easier to work with, and we're going to reveal the corrugation. And I was inspired by these little ornaments from my garland DIY to make this project. Make sure your cardboard is corrugated first off, and then find the side with the thinnest amount of paper and start removing it. Just take your time and remove all of that paper to reveal the corrugation. Sometimes it's a little stubborn with the adhesive, so keep an X-Acto knife on hand to help with those stubborn sections. And you may have some bits of paper left on there. That's fine. You can remove them now if you want to. I did it with a pair of scissors and just kind of scrape gently, or you can wait till you've cut them out and just do the pieces you actually are going to see. We're going to flip it over, and on the other side I had multiple layers of paper on this, so I'm just removing all but maybe 1 or 2 layers of that paper because I still wanted a flat side that I can trace my shapes onto. Removing all that extra paper just makes it easier to shape and cut. And then we want to make some templates for the little shapes we're going to be putting on this frame to make it look like a tree. And I'm calling them petals because that's exactly what they are. Really, they're petal shapes. I will show you here in a little bit the exact measurements for all 3 sizes that I do create, but you will need 3 sizes. Basically, I just made a large size to cover the sections on the bottom of the frame, medium size to cover the middle sections, and a smaller size to cover the sections on the top. You will need to cut the tip off of 2 of these frames. You'll see this right here is where you want to cut it so that it still sticks together. I took a very sharp box cutter and cut that off, and it should look like this. See, it's still together, but it has this nice hole that'll help us out later when we're putting this together. And I also cut off these little spikes on the sides of the bottom ring. There's a lot of little plastic spikes on this tree frame, but these are the only ones that really get in the way of putting on the little petal pieces. As promised, here's our measurements for the large one, the medium one, and our little small one. And I do have an even smaller one that I make later as well, but I'll tell you about that when we get to it. It is important which direction your corrugation is oriented when you cut out the petals. You will definitely want them to be vertical because it makes it a lot easier to shape them and bend them without tearing the paper. Flip it over to the smooth side on the back. That's why I did it this way, and use our templates to trace on our petal shapes. And you could see how I did one upside down and one right side up, and that just lets you trace on more to one single piece of cardboard. You will need this many of each size for one tree. And then you want to get a very sharp box cutter. I have a brand new blade in this one, and it cuts through this cardboard so easily. When you go to pull this away, if it doesn't just come right off, go back around with your box cutter so you don't tear the paper up on the front. Once you have it cut out, you can clean it up, trim it up with some scissors. Once you have all your pieces made, we can shape them. And you just want to shape it like you see me doing here so that it fits nice and flush on the frame. Then we're going to attach it using hot glue. I attached the first one with just hot glue at the top, but we'll go back in later and add tons more hot glue, don't worry. You want to line this up so at the top of the petal, flat end of the petal is flush with the second ring, the top of the second ring. And the bottom will overhang, and then we want to overlap each petal so that it hides the rest of that ring on the bottom. Put hot glue wherever you can. Just make sure you keep it away from anywhere you can see it. Otherwise, it's going to look terrible. You see me here putting hot glue all over the place, in between the petals, under every little piece of plastic, and I'm using clips to hold it in place. Without these clips, this project would have taken me forever because I would have had to wait on every bit of this glue to dry and harden before I could move on to the next part. Use one of these little tools like this silicone makeup applicator that I pick up at the Dollar Tree. Have it on hand so you can remove any unwanted hot glue before it hardens. And if you don't have any of those clips, grab you a pack or two of those from the Dollar Tree as well. They're so useful in all sorts of projects. And you can get the pink ones from the Crafter Squares section. And if you can't find them there, there's some red ones in the hardware section. We're just going to go ahead and attach all the rest of our petals onto the bottom portion of our frame. And then you want to go around and check the edges of your petals to make sure there's no paper that wants to flip up, because I mean that's going to happen when we cut it like that. Just use a bit of hot glue to secure that down so it's not flying around everywhere. Then we can move on to our second row. And the only thing different about this row is that we now can glue it to the previous row, which makes it much more secure in my opinion, because using the hot glue onto the paper, the cardboard itself, is a much better hold than onto that plastic frame. So we're going to add a line of hot glue at the flat end of our petal and the curved end and stick it on there. Make sure all the sides of our petals are glued down really good and secure down any flyaway paper. And at this point, 2 of your trees are done. But for the other 2, we're going to have to move on to the next row. We're just going to attach this pretty much the same exact way we did the previous row. Just make sure you're overlapping some of them and glue down every part that you possibly can. We're going to make toppers for 2 of them as well. The first topper I made is just a cone shape, and I took this little house shaped piece of cardboard, which I removed the excess paper on it to reveal the corrugation on both sides so it'll be easier to shape. And I'm going to make basically like an ice cream cone shape. Once I've got it shaped the way I want it, I'm going to go ahead and glue it down. And then we're going to trim the bottom of our cone up so it's nice and flat and even all the way around. Also trim that seam there so it's nice and straight as well and just looks better. Make sure it's nice and secure with a bit more hot glue and hold it down with a clip until it dries. Once it dries, we can attach it to the top of our tree. Just fill that cone with a bunch of hot glue, stick it on the top there. I made sure the seam was facing what I consider to be the back of my tree. Then you want to take these 2 unfinished trees as well as the cone top tree. And we're going to take white acrylic paint and a chip brush and dry brush that paint right onto the trees. I basically dry brush a very light dusting all over the entire tree, but I go in and add more paint on the rounded parts of the petals and up the sides in between the petals, so it looks more like snow that's settled onto a tree. I went back over the parts that I wanted to look more white with a second coat of that paint. If I had used chalk paint, I probably wouldn't have needed to do this, but I used regular acrylic paint. So once all 3 are painted and dry, we can assemble them. To do this, you're going to need a 32-inch bamboo skewer. You can grab these from Walmart in the camping section. You get a bunch of them in a pack for really, really cheap. And some foam. Any kind you have will work, but I'm using the foam that was actually in the same box, the computer box that I used the cardboard to make these with. We're just going to cut a piece that will fit nice and snug in there. And we're going to cut 1 for each of our trees. Then we're going to take our skewers and poke it right down the center of that foam. For the top one, you have to do it kind of like this, so it's not very accurate. But for the other 2, that top is open and it has that little hole where we cut the top of the plastic off, remember? You can just stick that right down in there. Put the foam in and then stick your skewer right down through that hole. Glue your foam into your trees. When you put these together, you see they won't go up against each other and be flush. We're going to have to cut some of that foam out. So I'm taking a box cutter and cutting a square all the way through that foam around the hole we made with our skewer. We're going to do that with the top and the middle tree, and then it'll fit together perfectly just like this. But you will need to pull it back apart and add some hot glue to those plastic bits, and then just stick it back up in there. That'll just help make sure it stays secure. I also add a bit of hot glue around the bamboo skewer at the very bottom tree. And then you could take a little bucket and some more foam and just stick you some pieces of foam into the bucket nice and tight. If you need to, glue them down. I used a couple pieces. Then I trimmed off a bit of the skewer and stuck it down in the foam. For this tree, I changed the topper design, and it's super simple. I just made 5 petals that are about 2 inches long and 1 inch wide at the widest point. And I made them more of a teardrop shape, so that instead of being flat at the top, they're pointed. And I just glued them on like I did all the other pieces to this tree. And we're going to paint this one gold. I'm using Folkart's metallic paint in brush gold, and I'm going to paint this all over this tree. I recommend going in a downward motion when you're painting so you don't rough up the paper too much, but you want to make sure you get into every little crack and crevice of this tree. So I would recommend using like a chip brush. It helps get into all those spaces. Make sure you paint the bottom as well and any plastic that might be showing. And that's it for this, guys. I think this turned out so beautifully. It's time consuming and it might be a little tedious, but I think it is so worth it because it's so pretty. And you don't have to make a huge one like I did. You could just make 1 or 2 of these small ones, and you don't even need a bucket. They can stand on their own. Just trim enough of that bamboo off that it will stand all by itself. And what a great way to reuse old cardboard boxes and turn trash into treasure. Let me know what you think about this project in the comments down below. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to tap that notification bell so you never miss a video. Check out my Holly Jolly playlist to see all of my holiday DIYs so far, and I hope you all have a very merry day, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.